Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Squat Cobbler, episode 36. This week, we're talking about Alice Cooper's album, Raise Your Fist and Yell. I'm Kelly Toole.
Finally.
Yeah, there's been a build-up. I'm Kelly Toole at KELLYTHUL on Twitter.
Hello, everybody. I am Mike at Official Pagan on everything, including Snapchat, unfortunately. And, I mean, Kelly, how pumped are you? Not only are we going to talk Raise Your Fist and Yell, but we have a special surprise for everybody tonight.
Indeed we do. For the first time ever in the rich history of Alice Cooper album reviews, we have a guest who will be joining us, mostly because I probably am not going to have a lot to say about this album, but also he's been an awesome fan and listener of what we've been putting together so far, fun to interact with, and a man I think that knows his Alice Cooper as well. And so I'd like to have our guest say hi. It's Terry. And Terry, you can kind of say hi, share any contact information you'd like to on social media if you want, and then maybe tell us a little bit about your Alice history.
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Terry Shea. I have too many handles to count, so if you want to email me at tbshea@hotmail.com, that'll cut through all of the smoke and mirrors. So my history, my pedigree for Alice, if you will, is I have been a heavy metal rock and prog rock fan since the womb. And as a kid, I was the world's biggest Kiss fan, but it was 1977, so I was allowed. I was one of the original members of the Kiss Army, and I got over that when I was about 10, because then I got into Pink Floyd. And so the Bob Ezrin connection is what ties this all together. So Bob Ezrin with Kiss, Bob Ezrin with Pink Floyd, and of course, Bob Ezrin with Alice Cooper. I think I just like anything Bob Ezrin has ever been involved with, even the horrible stuff. So I was a huge Kiss fan, but very, very aware of Alice Cooper, like everybody was. He was in the magazines, he was on TV, and I saw the Alice Cooper Muppet Show episode when it aired. That was big news in my neighborhood. We all gathered around the television. That was a big deal. So we knew who Alice Cooper was. You knew what the songs were. But my first Alice album that I actually purchased, and Kelly, this might interest you because this ties into sort of the period where you really started getting into them, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, is I purchased Flush the Fashion the week it came out, and that was due to seeing him perform Clones on Pink Lady and Jeff, which was a show that nobody had any business watching, but I think we knew that Alice Cooper was going to be on it, and then he blew us away with this song Clones, and I said, I need to know what that's about. I was getting out of the Kiss phase. I was experimenting with music, listening to the radio for the first time, and I bought Flush the Fashion, and I was entranced. I loved it. And to this day, I still rank Flush the Fashion very, very highly on my list of Alice Cooper albums. So I went backwards, learned the classic era even better. And to this day, I would say that it's the classic Alice Cooper group. I think I'm right alongside you guys with your rankings up to this point. So I'm interested to talk about this new Phase 2 era where in 1986, when he went metal and came back, we were glad to have him back. We were excited, and we thought, oh, he's going the metal route. All right, we'll put up with it and see what we've got. And there were hits, there were misses, and this leads us right to the album we're going to talk about today, Raise Your Fist and Yell.
All right, I guess we will begin.
Now,
go ahead,
all right,
Mike.
before we talk about the artwork, because I know that that's an important thing that we love to talk about here, I got an important question for Kelly. So it's no secret to anyone who's been following our Alice series up until this point, you hate this album. So the way you hate this album, so another favorite of mine is Black Sabbath. And I remember my dad was really into Alice and Black Sabbath when I was a kid. So those were like the first bands I was exposed to. And I remember listening to Sabbath. My dad only liked the first part of the Ozzy era. He skipped the last couple Ozzy records and basically completely ignored anything post-Ozzy. So I kind of got into all that later myself. And I remember hearing Never Say Die from Black Sabbath and just venomously hating it. Like I bought it on cassette as a kid, hated it, never listened to it again. And then I listened to it maybe a couple of years ago. And while I still didn't like it, I didn't, want to smash the computer when I heard it. Like it wasn't the same thing where when I listened to it on cassette, I never played that cassette again. So I'm not saying you would love the record now, re-listening to it for this show, but has your opinion changed with time at all?
It has not. I didn't like it before. I don't really like it now. Strange thing, we mentioned this before on the show, is that I dislike this album without really listening to it in its entirety. I somehow had achieved a point of view to say, I don't want any of this action. And I think it came out, and before I purchased it, I saw Freedom on MTV, and I kind of went, I don't think I'm very interested in that. And then I got little snippets of the other things and I just didn't like it. And then for preparation for the show, I needed to go all the way through it. And that was a long amount of time for me. That was a little painful. There's some moments and, so it's still Alice, but yeah, my opinion remains the same that this is not amongst my favorite Alice albums.
I'm really curious to see where this lands because you gave Terry control of your list for tonight, right?
That would be inaccurate. We will see. I kind of like what I'm hearing from Terry so far. So I'm almost comfortable, but I have trust issues. So I'm going to retain a certain level of veto right, and we can see.
Sorry about the diversion. We can obviously talk about the album artwork, but I was just curious because I had a similar experience myself with Never Say Die with Black Sabbath, and while I still don't like that album, my opinion has softened greatly over the years.
Beyond preparation for this show, I don't think I'll be making my way back through this album again.
Yeah, and I agree that I don't think I'll be listening to this one again. I'll say that right from the top.
There's a lot of other better choices, for sure. So the artwork, and this has been interesting because as we have kind of built up for a while the fact that this was one I was not enthusiastic about. And usually when we bring it up, Mike mentions the artwork, and he has always kind of said, hey, I don't like the artwork, but I bet I don't like the artwork for a different reason than you do. Mike being kind of the resident show's art critic, your thoughts on the cover?
My thoughts on the cover, I've always had a problem with this cover. First off, I just don't like it. It's not aesthetically pleasing looking. But another thing beyond the poor design, the hand, the face on the hand is a really, really direct ripoff of a series of graphic novels that came out in the early 80s and were turned into a movie called Vampire Hunter D. And other than having the Alice paint on the eyes, that is identical to that. So it's not only bad, but it's also not original.
Yeah, I don't know how much we talked about the Constrictor cover back in the day, but that, these two albums, which are very much akin, and they were released less than a year apart. I don't know how much we talked about the Constrictor cover, but while I was not a particularly large fan of the Constrictor cover either, fares a lot better when compared to this thing because I am just not a fan of it.
Yeah, we really didn't touch on the Constrictor cover, but yeah, I also don't think the Constrictor cover is great, but I don't like anything about it. I think the design is difficult to look at, and it's very blatantly ripped off from Vampire Hunter D, which was, like I said, a graphic novel series in the early 80s and then made into a movie, which the movie came out a couple of years before this album. So it was definitely, whoever did the artwork was definitely inspired by that.
Terry, your thoughts?
Yeah, the artwork was done by a guy named Jim Warren. I actually looked it up because it is so awful. And the Constrictor cover, well, it's got a little bit of a cheesy quality to it. It does look like, hey, everybody, I'm Alice Cooper. I'm back. Here's my snake. Here's my makeup. It makes a statement, for better or worse. So I think it's an okay cover. But this one is just awful. It's cartoony, and it's not even physically correct as far as physics is concerned. Is this fist supposed to be coming through paper, metal, whatever's behind it that's broken through, and then it's shot up again like a Muppet? I don't even know what it's supposed to be. I mean, are there snails behind it? I don't know what they're even trying for. It's got this snazzy, jagged, heavy metal font for the last two words. It's just hokey. And at first I thought, well, maybe it was a joke. Maybe he's poking fun at heavy metal cliches in his audience, but I don't think so, because if you look up the artist Jim Warren, all of his other art is exactly that type of thing. It's the kind of stuff you'd see, very sort of rainbowy, unicorn colored fantasy. You'd see these posters probably wherever you bought your D&D dice. You'd see that kind of stuff. There's some surrealism in there, and there's some portraits of people like Jimi Hendrix, and I think that maybe he was commissioned by Alice because he had a nod to some of his surrealist favorites and Dolly and all that stuff. But wow, it's just bad. It just misses the mark. It's too soft edged for a heavy metal album. First of all, it just looks like the artist was completely out of his element. And the idea of putting the face on the fist, Mike, you mentioned this being derivative of other things, and I think there are a lot of songs that are actually derivative of other things coming out at this time too, musically. So that's an interesting comment that you made there. Yeah, it's horrible. On the backside, it's just the lyrics and a really cartoony, swirly, melted picture of Alice's face. It looks like we caught him on the toilet and they censored the bottom. It just doesn't work. It's bad.
Well, I'm relieved. I thought this guy's style was he just drew people's faces on fists. It's like,
all right, then you know what? I would be more forgiving of it then, because then at least like that's his thing. But from the second I initially saw this, this era of Alice's career came a lot later for me because I was introduced to it from my dad's stuff, and he just listened to the Alice Cooper group up until Welcome to My Nightmare. So then I started getting into later Alice stuff on my own. And when I came across this one, immediately I was like, wow, somebody saw Vampire Hunter D. And then I did a terrible interpretation of it. And then listening to the record, and again, it's not like I listened to this a lot. I didn't hate it, but Terry kind of already touched on it. Like, this is pretty derivative of a lot of what was going on at the time musically.
One last comment on the cover, though, to Terry's point, is that we've been able to rely on Alice being consistent with the laws of physics on all previous album covers, and he's clearly not. On this one, he also has some biological violations, because this album should, I think, be called Raise Your Palm and Yell based on the cover. But anyway.
It bothers me, too, the shape of this hand. All right, I could talk probably for an hour about how bad this cover is, but I'd rather hear Kelly talk about how bad the album.
So we're gonna slog our way through this bad boy. We're gonna start off. It opens with "Freedom," which was released as the single. Most of the songs on this album were written by Alice and Kane Roberts, who's the bodybuilder slash video game creator slash guitarist guy, who's just massive. It was interesting on Constrictor. It's a different sound, but I wouldn't have picked a whole lot of different sounds here. I think this did follow Constrictor in less than a year, and it sounds like it in a lot of ways. So Freedom is where it starts, and it does start to sound a lot like Constrictor. This one song has grown on me a little bit. If I had to pick a favorite song on this album, this is probably close, but I'm not super enthusiastic about it, but it went on a little long for me.
I really don't have a whole lot to say about this song. It really does kind of set the pace for the album, which is sort of like Constrictor kind of brought us back. So let's do more of that, but just make it bigger and more indicative of the metal of the time. Like, whereas I think Constrictor sort of played with that a little bit, this just goes full on into that 80s metal sound, even more so than the previous record did. I found one weird, interesting thing about this song, though. It was Alice Cooper's last single under MCA until he guested on a Guns N' Roses song.
Terry, so Freedom kicks it off. What do you think?
Yeah, so I'm not a fan of this song. I wasn't a fan of it when it came out. I'm not a fan of it now. I think it's one of the weaker tracks on the album. The fact that it was the single was probably because this one comes as close to the Constrictor sound than anything else on this album. The Constrictor sound was very electronic drums. It was of its time. That producer, Beau Hill, I think his name was known for Rat and people like that, and it sounded a lot like that. This one, from what I've read, was an attempt to go back to a real drum sound, a heavier sound, and get away from the electronics, which I commend. And it's one of the strengths, if there are any strengths to this album, that's one of the strengths. This song is the standout. I would have almost hoped that they put this one near the end. I see what they were doing here, but Alice likes his songs about America. We had on Dada, we had I Love America, which was very tongue-in-cheek and very satirical. Great American Success Story on Constrictor wasn't as good a song, but it had the snarky cleverness to it, as far as Alice goes. But this song is very cliche. It sounds like Accept was covering a Twisted Sister song. There's no irony, there's no cleverness to it, and he admits this was his anthem against the whole parents' musical resource. The PMRCC wanted to censor albums, and he said he wanted a new anthem, and it sounded like he said, well, I need my Phase 2 anthem, I need my School's Out, I need my 18 for the 1980s heavy metal teenager generation, and it seems made to order. And Kelly, as you would say, the lyrics are just too on the nose. It's telling us what to do. I have a very hard time believing Alice Cooper even wrote these lyrics, because it sounds like a "we're not going to take it" ripoff. He works best when he reports. Teenage Frankenstein is a better anthem to me than this is, because he's saying, hey, raise your fist and yell a million times. And I don't know if they got the album title from the song or they went to it later. I know there were other titles in contention for this, but again, as I said, when this came out, we used to laugh at it. And he replaced Elected in the set list with this, which I really don't see. So not one of my favorites. And to this day, I think it fares even worse.
Yeah, Terry really hit on something there. This is very indicative of like we're not going to take it kind of thing.
Yeah, dead on. Because I've been struggling going through, because these, particularly this album, and then the next two, a different kind of direction, is still the heavy metal headbanger stuff. But I was trying to find an analog to what it was, and I think Twisted Sister and We're Not Going to Take It, which is kind of very light on any really clever humor and very kind of rote. We get a lot of that this album.
Yeah, it's rebelling against something.
Yeah.
just for the sake of saying you're rebelling against something. What I thought of when I was listening back to this album, and a little bit on the next track as well, it's in the documentary Metal: A Headbanger's Journey, which was directed by the same guy who did Super Duper Alice Cooper. He was talking to somebody about Kiss, since Terry mentioned Kiss, and it was one of those like talking heads interviews of different people. And he said something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's something to the effect of like making you believe you were rebelling by listening to Kiss, when in fact millions of people listened to Kiss, and there was Kiss lunchboxes and action figures, and Kiss was actually very mainstream and everywhere. But by joining the Kiss army and by, doing all these different things, they sort of made you believe you were rebelling against something. And that's kind of what I thought of when I listened to this track.
So we're going to move on to Lock Me Up. I do think, so I agree completely with Terry's point that this is kind of lyrically not as clever as a lot of stuff. I do think this is the one song on the album that has something that approaches almost kind of the Alice clever lyric when he talks about, you can cut my head off, but I won't change my mind. I thought that was pretty good, but what the musical track it lays up against to be delivered, you take back to Flush the Fashion again on headlines where it's like, keep my sidewalk status star bright, feel free to walk on me tonight, just don't spit on me. How that was delivered was so much more Alice, and maybe not funnier as a line than this, but it just goes over a lot better for me. Outside of that one kind of cool line and Robert Englund kicking off the song, which is kind of cool, not a fan.
I thought it was interesting, especially coming so quickly off the Constrictor, which had the Friday the 13th theme song. Now we get Robert Englund on this album, hitting the other major slasher franchise. And then there's another movie song later on this album from a John Carpenter. So I feel like he's like, what do kids like these days? Slasher movies and 80s hair metal. And I just I do like the Robert Englund little cameo thing, but at the same time, it feels very contrived to me. Like he's trying to do something that he thinks kids are going to buy into.
Yeah, and Alice said at this time this was his splatter period. He wanted to create splatter rock, and he was watching 3 splatter movies a day, and so he wasn't shying away from that at all. But Lock Me Up, it doesn't quite hit the mark. It's a nice heavy track. It's in the Alice Cooper tradition. It's got the drama. It's got the theater. It's got the same kind of themes, Go to Hell or Guilty. It's a song of persecution, but this is I think directed more towards his fans and his critics and his performance, and it's already less cheesy than Freedom, and it doesn't Kane Roberts doesn't go so far into what I call squealy land. He doesn't hit the whammy bar so many times in this one, so I like his restraint. The chorus is built for live performance. It sounds like he wants people to sing along. Reminds me of Kiss, reminds me of I Love It Loud, and that's not a bad thing. It's an anthemic sort of chorus. I actually went back and played this one again and said, I'm going to hear that one. So that's something. That time I heard maybe a little Iron Maiden ripoff in there. The lines, the lyrics are not his best, but they're kind of fun in that splatter genre. Cover your eyes, cover your head. You'll never know what hits you till you're covered in red. That's fun. It's almost like he's mocking anybody who dared make fun of him, like I did at the time during this comeback. I'm here to the end, my sick little friend. I'm back in your dreams. And you quoted the rest of it. I ain't going to change my mind. It sounds like he's calling out the audience and calling out the critics. It's almost his stab at a mission statement for the 80s. Not a great song, but he gets a B+ for effort on this one.
Yeah, I'm really with Terry on this. I don't think it's a great song, but I personally like this one better than Freedom. Also, since Robert Englund's on this, and this is probably, I don't get many opportunities to bring this up. Have either of you ever listened to Robert Englund's album that he put out probably around this same time? I'd have to check the dates.
Can't say that I have.
I remember it coming out.
Okay. Yeah, he put out an album that is mostly done in character as Freddy Krueger, doing 80s hard rock songs. Some of it's unlistenably bad. There's a few really good songs on there that are in pretty regular rotation on my phone. So
I was hoping you'd be doing like Wheels on the Bus and stuff like that. That would have been awesome. Like a children's album.
Under My Wheels on the Bus. That'd be good.
Ooh. Mashups. There you go. Yeah. Love it.
Now I kind of want to check the date and see what came first. Did Robert Englund do his album before this, or was this sort of like, did this propel him to do that?
You might have been watching the recording sessions. It's going like, oh, this doesn't look that hard.
A couple of these guys are clearly super high right now, so I could probably do this.
I can do this. I'm Freddy Krueger. All right, give the radio back. So Terry mentioned kind of early as we started the show, and then I hinted at it as well, that this album does not have a truly unique sound. It's very derivative of the group of the album that preceded it. And then what I'd like to kind of point out, in my opinion, it's derivative of itself, because there's about 3 in my opinion, at least 3 different versions of Freedom on this album, slightly kind of mixed and adjusted and twisted a little bit. But if you kind of boiled it down to its kind of DNA, I think Give the Radio Back is kind of like an outtake version of Freedom, and I'd be happy to give the radio back because I don't like this song.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what I said before, it's sort of a repetitive theme of like, just like the Kiss thing, like you're rebelling by buying this album. Feels like a theme to me.
Yeah, this one feels like sour grapes on Alice's part. I mean, and doing some research here and reading interviews, he had mentioned, they wrote this one on the road and wrote about 20 songs and picked the 10 best ones. And if this is one of the 10 best ones, I'd hate to hear what they left off. I think I wrote that this Give the Radio Back is one good chorus away from being an actual song. It just never gets off the ground. I like the sound of the guitars. I like the dual guitar solos. Again, the lyrics just not there. It's clearly what he's saying is, hey, radio's gotten safe. Let's put heavy rock back on the radio. But it already was. I mean, if he wrote this song or something like it in 1983 or 4, yeah, I'd agree. But in 1987, pop metal was everywhere. It just wasn't Alice's pop metal, so he wasn't getting played on the radio. So it sounds like he's almost complaining that, hey, nobody's playing my new stuff. None of my singles are charting. It's one of those things where I have to make something out of it going, oh, maybe he wants his actual physical radio back. The teacher took his radio and the vice principal has it. I don't know. It's never clear. It's an anthem that never works. Autograph, Turn Up the Radio, which is a much better example of this type of song. And it sounds again like he's just playing catch up with his contemporaries. Let me do a song about, turning up the radio and hard rock on the radio. I think if another band of the time did this song, it would have been a better song for them. He doesn't even sound like himself on this one. I listened to this and when he sounds like he's trying to imitate Bon Jovi vocally. The only thing I can say about this track that I even like at all is that it sounds like they're playing it live in the studio, and they get kudos for that. Once again, points for effort, but a bad song.
Yeah, you hit on 2 really good things there, which is, again, this entire album sort of feels derivative. It feels like Alice trying to play catch up instead of being Alice. But not only that, like, this is, to its credit, does sound a little bit more live and a little bit more of a band record than Constrictor, which I liked way better. But Constrictor is very programmed and very produced.
So now we're going to move on to a little ditty called Step on You. Terry mentioned at the beginning that we moved away from the electronic drums and the drum machines to more of a heavy metal drum, and this is a song that features that significantly. It's okay for me. Mostly I'm not a fan for most of these. This song, I gave it an okay. I do feel, I'll be interested in what each of your guys' thoughts are on this, that if you look at it sideways, it is like the larva of the sound that we see in Brutal Planet. I'm not saying that this could have ever been on Brutal Planet, but at least there are elements of industrial under the covers hinting there a little bit, wrapped in some traditional heavy metal, but it was almost like a bit of a teaser to say, eventually I'm going to come back to this sound and I'm going to do it a hell of a lot better.
That's really interesting. Now, I really don't have much to say about this song other than now I want to go back and listen to it again, thinking of what you just said, because, and I've already said this before, so I'm not giving anything away. I really like Brutal Planet. So now I have to listen to this again and kind of see if I'm on the same page as you with that.
Yeah, and just it's directionally towards Brutal Planet. Just know.
Yeah, and I'm gonna maybe diverge a little bit from your opinions. Listening to this album in order, at this point in the album, listening to it, I'm a little disappointed, and then Step on You shows up, and it becomes my favorite track so far on the album. Interesting history of this: it was actually written for Constrictor, but they thought it sounded too much like Give It Up, and they didn't want to put sound-alike songs on the album, so they left it off and they put it on this one, which I think is very interesting as far as trivia goes. But I'm glad it's on this album, because if it was on Constrictor, they would have ruined it. It would have been overprocessed, overproduced, and it's so much better than Give It Up for me. I think it's a powerhouse song. I really like it. I did listen to it again and again. It's got that Alice snarl. It's got great guitar. It's relentless. At this point, and Kelly, to your point, this is the most metal we've heard Alice up to this point ever. And the guitars just really make the song. It's the first time I'm actually paying more attention to the guitars in some cases. And it's a kind of, for me, it's a bit of a modern Alice Cooper classic. I really do like this song. I don't know who he's addressing lyrically, but one way to look at these lyrics is that he's actually talking to the addict in himself, and I like the lyrics. The snow in your nose, the crack in your brain, it used to be cool, now it's just insane. Could be talking about somebody new or once knew. You're in my song, but you ain't in my crowd. I like the lyrics. I like the delivery. I really like this song. I think it's a highlight.
You hit on something really interesting there, because I hadn't read that specifically that this was something written for Constrictor that was left off of that. But I feel like there's a lot of stuff on this record that could have been gestating from Constrictor to this. And the fact that there is such a short window between them, since this is only a year later this was released, I could see a lot of this being leftovers from Constrictor reworked into new things.
Yeah, and speaking of songs that could have been on Constrictor but weren't because they weren't good enough, let's talk about Not That Kind of Love, because I'm not that kind of fan of this song. That's all I have to say about that.
Not really into this one. This is, not really into it. You, Terry?
Again, I'm going to diverge. And I even surprised myself because I as a, once again, when this came out, you have to remember that we're still in the vinyl era. CDs had just been introduced maybe a little bit before. Not a lot of people had them, so it wouldn't have been the format we were listening to it on. If you were listening at all, it would have been vinyl or cassette. And this is the closer of side one. And as side one closers go, it's not that bad. And what's interesting about this one for me, the sound is good. And there's this little stab at what would to come later. There's a little bit of a later generation metal flavor in here. And there's almost in the chorus a kind of Metallica feel to the vocals. There's a little Whitesnake in there. There's some early Motley Crue sound in there. And there's a couple of times on this album that I wonder if he's being derivative or if he's actually poking fun at the people that he felt were derivative of him. Because in all these interviews of this period he's talking about, I got back into it because there was, there's Kiss and Ozzy and all these people ripping me off. It was time to come out and show them how it's done. And at the end of it, if you listen to if you could put yourself through the song again, listen to the backing vocals at the end. It sounds like they're making fun of Love Gun by Kiss. It sounds like he was thumbing his nose at them. It's not a great song, but there's a few things in there that if you're listening to it critically, which is what I had to do for this, I find interesting. Not a song I'm going to play on purpose again, but there's some stuff in there that's worth noting. And that's what I have to say about that.
All right, so we're going to move over to side two, and Prince of Darkness. Mike had mentioned that, as with Constrictor, we got a movie song on here. Here it's John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness that Alice was in. Kip Winger got some songwriting credits on this one here.
Aren't all of his songwriting credits on side two?
Yep, I think there's 2 or 3, and this is because the rest of it's Alice and Kane.
Right.
To me, okay, so there's a couple things, is that this is he's doing a movie song and he's following Man Behind the Mask, which Mike and I love as a song. And so your expectations are high that he's going to do something comparable. And I do not feel this is comparable. And then a really strange moment at the end, which we're talking about derivative again, very into Prince of Darkness. It almost feels like we get a Pink Floyd, The Lunatic is on the Grass kind of mojo going at the very tail end.
All right. So I don't think this is a great song. And if you're going to draw the comparison to which is the better song, Man Behind the Mask or this doesn't even remotely compare. Man Behind the Mask is a personal favorite of mine of Alice's entire catalog. And we've kind of talked about this, and I think we talked about it on the show. When we finish up this series of Alice reviews, I am going to get lyrics from that song tattooed to me. So I'm a huge fan of that song. However, as much as this song doesn't compare to that, Prince of Darkness is one of my favorite movies. I am largely alone in that, especially in John Carpenter's filmography. When you talk about a lot of the things that he's made over the years and movies that people love, like Halloween, The Thing, Big Trouble in Little China, They Live. I'm a big John Carpenter fan in general. Prince of Darkness is my favorite of his and one of my favorite movies overall. So I have an affinity for the song that I think is probably really, really connected more to the movie than the song. Whereas like Man Behind the Mask, that Friday the 13th movie is fun, but not necessarily a great movie. My love is really for that song, whereas in this instance, I'm clouded by my love of the movie.
I'll piggyback on that. Man Behind the Mask was a guilty pleasure. Even at the time, it was, wow, this is not how we expect Alice to sound, but it's a great song. And the demo versions of it are even better. That's, for me, a personal favorite as well. Prince of Darkness, I do not like this song. I wish that they had taken the same direction as Man Behind the Mask and said, this is a song, it's a soundtrack song, it's out of place, let's tack it on the end. I think that would have been much better served if they threw this as the last, and I'll talk later about my feelings about the end of the album anyway. This would have been a good closer. Yeah, Kip Winger stepped in on this one, and Alice said in interviews that when they wanted to soften the sound up a little bit, they'd get Kip in. because he didn't write stuff that they liked, but if they wanted to get a more poppy or a more melodic sound, they go, Kip, give us something, and here's an example. But yeah, it starts off sounding like a Dokken song for me, and I wasn't even a fan of Dokken when Dokken was popular. And the lyrics are not.
I didn't know Dokken did other things other than their song they did for Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, they did a few, and they weren't great. They were a perfect example.
Like I didn't even know there was other Dokken songs.
Oh yeah,
somebody started like naming Dokken songs. I was like, no, there's just Dream Warriors. There is no other. Like then the band died or something. Like
Dokken was weak even at the time, and they're just not his best lyrics. It sounds like a teenager's version of a Sabbath Dio lyric, and it's just basically, hey, don't follow the devil. He's a bad guy, and it's very hard to take it seriously as a soundtrack song over the closing credits. And again, Mike, like you, I loved that movie, and I watched it again and again. I was a big fan. But every horror movie in the 80s had a song like this one in their credits somewhere. So this is Alice's contribution to that. It's a throwaway song for me. And the chorus of the song is a direct ripoff of Ozzy's Mr. Crowley. It's the same exact chorus. And maybe it's another subtle jab because he talks about Ozzy a lot and how Ozzy ripped him off. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I prefer to think he was being clever because it makes me like it just a little bit. And that breakdown at the end you mentioned, that sort of proggy rock thing, that's the best part of the song for me. And then it comes back in, works a little better. We get this acoustic guitar break. This coda sounds like they're going in different movements. And it's also the longest song on the album, and it's about 2 minutes too long. Yeah, not my favorite. Not a fan.
Yeah, Terry really hit on a couple of interesting things there. And there was something listening back to it because I, again, absolutely love this movie. Other than it playing over the credits, it briefly appears in the movie of just faintly in the background because a character is listening to it on his headphones.
Is it this song or Freedom that is in the movie?
On the headphones, I believe it's this song.
Okay.
I thought it was this song as well, I think.
Okay, well you get.
Yeah.
I've not watched that movie to the same level you guys, so I'll trust you. I got some bad Wikipedia information.
Yeah, but I mean this. Even as a soundtrack song, certainly doesn't compare to Man Behind the Mask. And granted, Man Behind the Mask is definitely a guilty pleasure song, like Terry said, but it's a great song. You really hit on something interesting that I couldn't put my finger on when I was listening back to it, because again, I've seen Prince of Darkness a million times. That is something that just goes on as background for me. I don't really listen to just this song. You hit on something I was trying to put my finger on and couldn't. It's very much like overly simplified Dio lyrics.
Yeah.
Like it really, really is, and I couldn't put my finger on it listening back to it. The Dio reference, I think, is dead on. It's really unfortunate that it's not as good as Man Behind the Mask, and I think it's telling that if you get the Prince of Darkness soundtrack album, this is actually not on it, and it's a double album. So it's not it's not like they ran out of room or anything like that. In fact, a number of the songs appear on it twice on the deluxe edition of it, because at some point on Squat Cobbler, that will be a recommendation of mine, because I think it's one of the best soundtrack albums ever released. And it has excellent music in it, and a lot of the songs are included twice in the score mix and then as a standalone song mix. So even when they're including songs twice on the double album, this still isn't on there.
I have to wonder.
I think that's kind of telling.
The record company, because he was having problems with MCA at the time, and who released the soundtrack to the movie. I wonder if there was a licensing issue.
Could be, but I'm pretty sure, like, from what and I could be wrong here, but I believe his level of involvement, and this still could be a licensing related thing, but his involvement in the movie had to do with his manager, didn't it?
Oh, maybe, yeah.
Being a producer on the film.
Oh, I know.
So I wonder, I have to look up the soundtrack now and see who released it, because it could be a licensing issue, but even later for the 2-disc deluxe edition version of it, they didn't even do it for that.
Not cool. Because while I don't really like this song, it certainly belongs on the soundtrack to the movie it was the soundtrack for.
I mean, it is in the movie, so at least there's that.
Yeah, unlike Man with the Golden Gun or Back to School. So he also had a kind of very storied movie song career. All right, we're going to move up to Time to Kill. After Winger's involved again with this one. So my opinion, if you didn't like Freedom, and if you didn't like the genetically modified Freedom that gave the radio back, perhaps you would like the further genetically modified Freedom that gives you Time to Kill, which I didn't.
Yeah, it is kind of Freedom again, isn't it?
And I'm not saying it's carbon, but I'm just saying if you really, just kind of, if you were kind of pixelating it at a certain point, there would start to be some similarities, in my opinion.
Yeah, this is the one I have almost nothing to say. It's an obligatory heavy metal song about prisoners. Every heavy metal band's got to have a prisoner song, but he covered that territory back on Dwight Fry and From the Inside, and he had far more to say with actual songs. The title could possibly be a pun. It's Time to Kill. I've got time to kill, whatever. It's rote heavy metal. I wait for the guitar solos to come around, and I will never play the song again on purpose.
Yeah, with the original working title, Album to Fill. All right.
Gotta hit 10 songs.
Yeah.
It's like, 10 songs. Boom. So, Chop, Chop, Chop. Now, Mike mentioned that Mr. Winger is prevalent as co-songwriting credits on this side. This, in fact, is the only song on side 2 that he's not a part of. Chop, Chop, Chop. Again, not particularly enthusiastic about this song. I saw another parallel, though, that at least in kind of listening to it and then thinking about Along Came a Spider, spiritually started to say, okay, so this could be a precursor to that. Again, not done as well and delivered, because Alice is serious, in my opinion, serious menace throughout Along Came a Spider, and it is in your face and intense and runs through, where this intends to be that and to be intimidating, but it's a little hollow for me. This sounds to me like a song that might have come up during the Spider sessions and very quickly said, nah, we could do better than that.
That's interesting. Another one where I'm going to have to go back and kind of check that out again, because I like Along Came a Spider. And I think that's an album where I feel like, because even though a lot of people didn't like the Brutal Planet, Dragontown type records, they were heavily discussed, at least. Whereas I feel like Along Came a Spider kind of doesn't get the attention that it deserves. I would have to go back and kind of check that out.
This is a trilogy, right? It's the Psycho trilogy that closes out the album, and I've got some problems with it, but I love the idea of a trilogy. It's a very Alice Cooper thing to do. It looks like he's trying to really needle people by amping up the sick factor. It's a song about a serial killer that preys on prostitutes, and as Alice Cooper character songs, this one's up there with a lot of the Cooper canon. Probably the most Alice that he sounded on the album up until this point. I think Gail gets even more into that territory. But, musically, it's just not a great song. It's very forgettable. But his vocal delivery takes what is a nothing song, gives it a little bit of life that it wouldn't have had otherwise. I like some of the production touches. He sings, Walking in the Neon Lights, and the echo on the vocal I thought was a nice touch. And I like the way it segues into the next song, Gale, and we'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, it's not a great song. And I thought, okay, well, a lot of these were meant to be done live. And then I watched some of the live footage from this tour. I'm like, nah, it falls flat for me. Not to mention the fact that the presentation on stage of it is in 2017 questionable at best. But yeah, it starts off this trilogy, but not a terrific song.
It's interesting you mentioned the live thing, because as you've already heard, Kelly and I have talked a great deal about how sometimes the live versions of the songs really elevate them even further. I'm not sure that I've seen much or any live footage of tracks off this album other than Prince of Darkness. I know I've seen live clips of that, but I'm not off the top of my head going to say I've never seen any other or heard any other live recordings of these songs.
So I think for the tour, which featured the most heavy splatter effects on stage, people being impaled by a bike and all that kind of stuff.
Which was in the movie.
Yep. Freedom, Chop, 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 and Prince of Darkness are, I think, the tracks that at least made it for the Raise Your Fist and Yell tour. But they haven't appeared anytime recently when I've seen Alice.
Yeah, it featured on that tour. There's footage out there from New Haven, I believe, that you can see. It's not the best audio, but you get a sense of it. So
it still doesn't deliver for you, seeing it live?
No. It seems like it was written so that he could act this sequence out.
Which, as Terry pointed out, we're into a trilogy here. The songs kind of bleed into each other. It ends with him spelling her name Mary, which we all know spells Gale. And it goes into the song Gale. So this was, and even further cemented as Terry started talking about this being a trilogy. This is an okay song for me. I probably would think more of it if I hadn't listened to an album called Welcome to My Nightmare that had Steven, a better execution of a song like this in a trilogy, and somewhat about the same delivery too. So this isn't bad, but I think he's done something like this a lot better earlier. those are my thoughts. Mike, yours on Gale?
Kind of in the same boat as you. I like that we have this trilogy here, like Terry mentioned, because I feel like that's kind of getting back to the Alice we know, like having this through line between these songs other than just Rebel Metal now. Like now we have a storyline, we have a through line connecting the songs, there's a little bit of a concept forming. So I'm really comfortable here insofar as like this is Alice again. But the songs, like you said, like, you know, a similar type of song being Steven, does this compare to Steven? No. Terry?
It doesn't even compare to Mary Ann, which is another song that's very much like this. It sounds like he's trying to go back to those types of songs, and it's a decent effort. I mean, it's almost like, hey, let's sound like Bob Ezrin for one song and see if we can get that. And they almost get there. It's got that synthesized harpsichord. It's got the organ. It's the most throwbacky Alice tune on the record, like you had mentioned. And this goes back to the Kip Winger thing. Something I read about this was, look, we wanted to do this super sick song because the lyrics are just sick as hell. And then we're like, all right, Kip, give us a really nice melody to counteract that. And so the melody is all Winger, which is interesting. I like the lyrics to this one. The bugs serve time in her skeletal jail. I wonder how the bugs remember Gale. I love the fact that the character, no matter who he kills, their name is going to be Gale. And I love that twist at the end of the previous track where it's Mary, you're Gale, you're all Gale, everyone's Gale. And I love how he doesn't think that he has to explain that. You have to figure out for yourself, why is everyone Gale? Who is Gale? So I kind of like that as a storytelling aspect. And in interviews, he said, oh, well, this character doesn't know whether he's watching a horror movie or in one. So that's sort of the exposition for it. But it's a throwaway tune that segues in between these two. And what's telling is that if this is the segue song and it's better than the other two for me, that doesn't say much for the trilogy. So that's Gale.
And then we wrap this bad boy up, thankfully, with Roses on White Lace. Not a fan. I have nothing else to say.
Wow. Okay. I thought there would be something. I was waiting for you to say something else. Like, well, no.
I'm just glad it stopped. That was about
this is a song on the album, Mike. Yeah. Again, I like the idea of this trilogy on the album because it gives us a little bit of the Alice like we like and we're comfortable with, but it's kind of like getting excited for nothing because it never gets there. It never gets, and like Terry said, like you're getting a little teases of sort of that Ezrin sound, and we're getting a little bit of what we know, killer element as when Along Came a Spider comes along, but this part of the album never gets there for me. Now, for both of you guys, did this, well, especially for Kelly, did this elevate the album at all, getting this sort of trilogy at the end and more of that, what I'm going to call like at least an element of classic Alice on this record? Did this help at all for you?
Elevate might be a strong word for me. I don't know. I do think I welcomed the return to that kind of idea and at least some of the tonality of it and the thinking behind it, the construction versus the whole front part of this album, which just seems to be kind of kitchen sinking, rebellion, just be angry, So I did. And that's more like what you expect from Alice, is either there's a storyline or there's a lot of cleverness to it. So that did help, but the patient did not make it off the table for me with this trilogy at the end.
Yeah, and I'll agree. This one falls flat as an album closer. It fails completely, and I had to think about, well, what is it that I'm missing? I mean, not that it's just the lyrics are good. This whole psycho, I took your evil skin away. It's all cut and dry. There's a lot of that wordplay that we enjoy from Alice, but it just as a song is no good. And I realize what's missing when you see an Alice Cooper concert. He always gets that, no matter how sick he gets his comeuppance to the end. They chop his head off, they hang him, something happens. There's this redemption and then catharsis. There's a catharsis for the listener. There's a catharsis for the audience. We've let up. There's a death. He rises, and then we have fun, and everybody goes home. This album just ends with a thud. The song even just like goes away with nothing. We're used to big choruses, some sort of big ending on an Alice Cooper album. It's just not here. It's not here at all, which is why I thought they should have tacked Prince of Darkness on the end, because at least that almost sounds like the end of an album with all of those movements at the end. This one just goes away and really just puts a bad taste in my mouth. Anything that I liked prior to this is tainted by the fact that it ends so badly for me.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because I was listening through the album in its entirety because I was contractually obligated to do so. And I was working on a podcast, getting some stuff uploaded and just some of the mechanics of that. And this song played and ended, and I was confused because I said, "So there's more, right?" Or because it really doesn't finish the album off. It's just it's like, okay, so what? There must be another song, or did something break? But it just kind of falls flat. So I'm sorry, Mike, I cut you off earlier. You were going to say something?
I agree with both of you guys said this. It falls flat. It doesn't really have an ending, and I think Terry's right. I think if you move Prince of Darkness to the end, sequencing wise, it would have helped this album a lot.
It would be an improvement.
Now, how much, Kelly, could Alice have saved this record for you if maybe there was a little bit more of the storyline through here and a little bit less generic Rebellion songs, or is there just nothing that could save this one for you?
So I don't think so, but so let me kind of turn that around on you. Do you think, could he have made changes to this to bring it up to the same level? Could you hold this album in the same regard you hold Constrictor? Things that could be done to this album where you basically, wow, those two are interchangeable.
No, only because like the thing that I think I texted this to you after I listened to the album. The thing with this record for me was it's so much like Constrictor. Like I feel like Constrictor came out, Alice was kind of like, getting back on his feet and getting back out there again, that they were just like, let's do more of that, but kind of bigger. And what happened to me is like Constrictor is not a great album, but it is a fun album. There's a lot of there's some cool songs on there. There's definitely like guilty pleasure stuff on there. Is it classic Alice? Is it Alice at his best? No. So it's sort of like he's being derivative, not just of the music that was popular at the time, but now he's being derivative of what he just did. And he's being derivative of a record that, while I do like it, and I think that there's some great songs on it, he's being a derivative of a record that isn't even his best record. So in that sense, no, there's nothing that could have really turned this around for me. Like if you're going to revisit yourself, revisit your best material.
Fair enough.
One interesting piece of trivia that might have saved this album a little bit, aside from having better songs, the original title I found was supposed to be called Shriek of the Mutilated, named after...
I would have liked it better.
Yeah, exactly. That was the original title, and somewhere along the way they lost that.
Yeah, no, that would have been way better. Because I feel like Shriek of the Mutilated, now we're talking, not only is it a better title, we're talking different artwork, a complete different presentation of this. So I feel like that title would have, a lot of things could have changed. A lot of dominoes would have fallen differently with a different title. Would it make the songs better? No. But
yep, there'd be like a big foot coming out of the ground with a Alice face on it or something like that. It'd be great.
Yeah,
there would have been blood on the fist.
Right. He was a victim of his time. Everybody sounded like this then. I mean, Ozzy was sounding like this. Everybody was sounding like this. They were all just in a big haze of Aquanet. And he hadn't worked with Desmond Child yet, so he wasn't, he was a victim of the time. I blame 1987 and MTV and Hairspray and all of that. But yeah, this is a miss.
Speaking of Hairspray, it's about to make a major appearance with Alice as we move now into Trash from there. So that's going to be interesting. So we move to the portion where we need to pick each of us need to pick a track off of this album that our good friend Pat Boone would put on his Alice compilation album. Terry, we'll let you lead off. If you were going to pick a Pat Boone song off of this album for him to cover, what would you be giving Mr. Boone?
I would like to think that Pat Boone would sing Prince of Darkness because of his religious connotations and people associate that with him, but I just can't see him getting through all 5 minutes of this. So I'm going to give him Freedom.
I can see
I'm
that.
going to have to go with Terry on this. I mean, the one I would want him to do is Prince of Darkness, but Freedom.
So I'm going to go a different way. And I want you to imagine, if you will, Pink Lady and Jeff again. So we talked about Pink Lady and Jeff, and we had Alice on doing clones. So Pat's coming on Pink Lady and Jeff, and he's doing chop, 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 but he's doing it like the old variety show kind of way. He's got like a slap chop on a table, and he's just hitting it during the chop, chop, chop part, and he's doing a real hokey version of it. So that would be my that'll scar everyone.
I'd watch that.
Okay.
Yeah, that might actually elevate that song a lot for me.
All right. So, see, I have developed trust in Terry through this conversation that I almost could hand him my placement rights to it, but I guess I will do that, but I'm going to reserve the right to if he breaks bad on me here and we have a new tie for number one, I can revise it, and I can do that because I do the blog post and the audio podcast, and or the editing for the podcast, so I can undo any evilness. But We will let Mike start first. Raise your fist and yell. The 17th album we are ranking. If you need a reminder, Killer's at number 3. Or should I go a little further down the list for you?
Okay, so what? Give me my last 5, because all right, I know Pretties for You and Easy Action aren't going anywhere.
Yeah.
So what did I have right above Easy Action?
So from the bottom of your list up, the 5 albums are, so in last position currently, Pretties for You, Easy Action, Alice Cooper Goes to Hell, Zipper Catches Skin, Lace and Whiskey.
Do I like this better than Alice Cooper Goes to Hell? That's tough. You know what? It's going to go right above Alice Cooper Goes to Hell for me. I have a big problem with Goes to Hell in that there's not enough rock on that record, and at least this has rock songs, and I really, really love Prince of Darkness. The movie really clouds my judgment of that song a lot.
Okay, so it'll be number lucky 13 for you on your list. So I'm going to try and channel here to Terry where... Let me give you my bottom 5. Here's a hint. It's going to be in that range. And just so you know, Terry... Three-way tie all day. Yeah. Just so you know, often my final resting point is for me to go, when I look at the 2 albums, to kind of put them into another, say, which of those 2, if those 2 albums were both sitting out on the table, which one would I pick up and play over the other? So my bottom list, very similar to
Wait, how is that your tiebreaker when you can't play 2 albums at the same time?
It's a breaker. I have to pick one. That's how it breaks my tie, because I have to say this is the
one.
Right,
you have to pick one, so you can't have ties, right? Just getting back to the tie thing.
Okay, we can solve that problem right now. My number 1 album is now officially Billion Dollar Babies. So as of this list forward, we're done. Because I'm pat it with you, Blinsky.
Or is it? Because Terry hasn't placed this album yet.
Starting at the bottom of my list, and I see no need to go above those 5. Similar to Mike's, but a little different. Pretties for You, Easy Action, Lace and Whiskey, Zipper Catches Skin, and Alice Cooper Goes to Hell.
I'm not going to pull any surprises and say it should be in even the top 10. I'm going to defer to where I think you want this to land. But my own caveat is, being such a prog rock fan, I don't have the same kind of problem with Pretties for You that you guys have. So I will listen to that album on purpose from time to time, believe it or not. And I think that Mr. and Misdemeanor is one of the classic Alice Cooper songs. So just getting that out of the way.
I'm going to need to check the records there, but I believe Mr. and Misdemeanor is on Easy Action.
It is. That's what I'm saying. I'm singling that out as far as a reason to listen to Easy Action.
I like where you're going. Yeah. I think we are making a connection here.
Yeah. So
I like where you're going too. You're moving Pretties for You up after you put this on the list.
Well, I'm actually tempted to put Raise Your Fist and Yell rock bottom on my list. Now I have to step back and think, I will never listen to this album on purpose again ever. There's one song that I liked, that I listened to a few times. Is it going to make me go back and say that is a reason to put it up? I think you might have wanted to put it at 3rd from the bottom, above Easy Action, and I would be okay with that. I personally would put it dead last.
So I think, in the spirit of, you've been a fantastic guest and brought a lot, and I respect your judgment, I think we need to split the difference. And so we will nestle it in between Easy Action and Pretty for You. And I will be revising my list to have a new, undisputed number 1 album, which is not Love It to Death.
What an auspicious occasion.
All right. This is fun. This is good. Think about it a little bit. It's great having you on, Terry. Think about it a little bit as we you kind of know what's coming up. Mm-hmm. If there's any kind of special pearls in there coming down the road that you've got, whether it's like a Brutal Planet or Along Came a Spider or whatever, if there's another album you're like, this is one I got stuff to say, let me know.
And I'd like to point out that in the news today, they announced that the original band is going to do some dates together. The original Alice Cooper group lineup.
In the UK, right?
Yes, in the UK.
So, Mike, your current passport situation?
I have a passport, so, I mean, we could do this.
Yeah, the live squat cobbler from England. That'll be special.
And also, just because I brought it up earlier, I need to quickly go back. Robert Englund's album came out in '87.
Same time.
Yeah, around the same time as this.
I'm going to have to look into that. I had no clue on that. All right, so we've made it through Raise Your Fist and Yell. And I believe the next time we see Alice, there's a little bit of a delay here, more of a 2-year hiatus, and then we're going into Trash.
Kelly's 5th number 1.
I don't know what you're talking about. I have no ties on my list. All right, good. Well, Terry, thank you very much. This was awesome. Appreciate you taking the time to join us. Really loved your insights and your willingness to keep Razorfish and Yell on the appropriate part of my list. Very appreciative of that.
It's been my pleasure.
That's excellent. Good. Well, that wraps it up for this week, folks, and we look forward to catching you again next week. So thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.